Getting your podcast onto YouTube. From Manchester in England, the latest from podnews.net with co-host, powerful podcast hosting for agencies and brands. Podcast hosting company RSS.com has launched PodViz, an in-house visualization tool to produce videos from audio podcasts for services like YouTube. The service supports chapter art and YouTube metadata. We link to an example today from our show notes and our newsletter at podnews.net. It's not limited to the company's hosting customers either. Any podcaster can try it. RSS.com/PodViz, and that's PodViz with a Z or a Z. The first show and tell networking event for podcasting from Podnews, Podnews Live, comes to Media City UK in Salford tomorrow. Some tickets are still available at podnews.net/live. Podcasters wanting to buy a Blue Yeti. Owner Logitech is retiring the Blue brand for hardware. But don't worry, the microphones don't go away. They're just called Yeti these days. Spotify is selling its music and podcast creation tool Soundtrap back to its original owners. No terms were given. In the past few weeks, more than 300 podcasters have created podcast lists on podcast listening app Good Pods. 5 Best Podcasts 4 is what they're called. And watching our podcast host migration tool, you'll often see shows migrating to Spotify's Megaphone. Well, working with an investor, we've learned that since early 2021, our sample data shows that Spotify's Megaphone has migrated at least 2,400 shows to its network from other hosting companies, representing shows with a total of 131 million listeners. The number of shows being migrated in our sample continues to increase, though the shows transferring recently have fewer listeners. It's time for some tech stuff, and 6 features have been formalized into the new podcast namespace. They're now fully documented in the tag specification document, and of the new features, the Pod News Daily podcast supports Podbing and Podroll. And in case you're wondering what that podcast is, you're listening to it. And Nathan Gaithright has worked on a transcription service to produce word-by-word JSON transcripts. We link to his work so far in our show notes and our newsletter at podnews.net. And in podcast news, the economics of everyday things is brand new from Freakonomics Radio, which launched last night after a successful pilot. What happens to used hotel soap? And how do pop songs make their money? The show's first episode looks at the economics of professional sports mascots. Some big deals change the world, and The Closer is new today with stories that are everything you want in a good drama, tales of failure, betrayal, high stakes and big risks. It's new from Project Brazen and PRX, and around 170,000 people are reported missing every year in the UK. That's one disappearance every 90 seconds. The Missing returns for a new season today, telling the story of a long-term missing person who has never been traced. Produced by charities Locate International and Missing People, perhaps you can help solve some of these real-life searches for missing family members. This podcast is sponsored by Co-Host and Quill. Agencies and brands need better podcast analytics. Discover companies that listen to your podcast, where downloads are coming from, and how listeners are resonating with Co-Host. Co-hostpodcasting.com. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.